Khamzat Chimaev versus Dricus Du Plessis has every MMA fan and YouTuber on the planet sitting on the fence because this is one of the hardest fights to predict, and it's also my most anticipated title fight of the entire year. This is by far, in my opinion, the biggest fight of the year. The UFC's dropped the ball in 2025, but now we finally got Khamzat Chimaev and Dricus Du Plessis. We're just 6 days away, or 5 days away, actually. And in this video, I want to bring up their skill sets. I want to talk about their records, their notable wins, and ultimately pose a prediction at the end of this video saying who's going to win this fight, because I've been going back and forth. Largely, I pick Hamzat, but the more I think about it, I'm like, man, DDP actually has a good chance. Now, the odds are saying that Hamzat is a 2-1 favorite. I honestly do not agree with that. I think maybe Hamzat should be like a very slight favorite, literally like a minus like 110. I think it should nearly be a pick 'em, because this fight is so close on paper. You have the wrestling phenom of Khamzat Chimaev, who has just been running through everybody outside of Kamaru Usman and Gilbert Burns, of course. And you have Dricus Du Plessis, who's perfect in the UFC. And outside of the first Sean Strickland fight, has really just made every fight look easy. So this is a very hard fight to predict. And I ultimately think it's going to come down to how Dricus Du Plessis can handle Khamzat Chimaev's grappling ability. But we'll get to that later on in the video. Let's start off with their notable wins. Obviously, Khamzat Chimaev has beaten Robert Whittaker. That's arguably his best win. Choked him out or made him tap due to a teeth injury in the first round. He also has a win over Kamaru Usman, although most people look at that fight as a draw because Khamzat Chimaev 10-8 the first round and arguably lost the last two. Should have been ruled a draw, but they gave him the unanimous decision. He submitted Kevin Holland back in 2022. That hasn't aged so well, as Kevin Holland's been submitted a bunch of times, although he did make it look easy in the first round. And he had that war versus Gilbert Burns. That could have went either way, but ultimately he got the decision. So that's Khamzat's 4 notable wins. He's also undefeated in the UFC. So is Dricus Du Plessis. Khamzat Chimaev's 8-0 in the UFC. Dricus Du Plessis is 9-0. Dricus, you look at his record, he has 2 wins over Sean Strickland. The first fight, very close, but in the second fight, Dricus showed an ability to adjust and be able to take over the fight as it went on and pretty much destroy Sean Strickland. Made it look easy in the second fight. He has a submission win over Israel Adesanya, showing that he can grapple, obviously. Dricus actually has more submissions on his record than he does knockouts. He has 11 submissions and 9 knockouts, I believe, and 20 wins. So people forget, man, Dricus Du Plessis came up as a grappler, but ultimately well-rounded out his skill set to ultimately become a striker. And honestly, just a complete mixed martial artist. I know he looks goofy, but this guy's one of the most effective champions that we've had in recent memory. And he also has a win over Robert Whittaker. A TKO in the fight against Robert Whittaker in the second round back in 2023. And I think a lot of people, including Hamzat, look at that Whittaker fight and say, man, if Whittaker can get DDP down, Khamzat Chimaev 100% is getting Dricus Du Plessis down. And we'll talk about that a little more in a minute. He also has a win over Derek Brunson and Darren Till. Now, he submitted Darren Till pretty easily because Darren Till did, I think Darren Till pieced him up in the first or second round. He ultimately got the submission. But a big criticism of Dricus, I think, is that in the Brunson fight, he actually got his back taken. And people criticize Dricus for that because they're like, dude, if Brunson's taking your back, Hamzat's putting you to sleep. So that's another interesting thing to look at. But we also have to remember that that fight was, what, 3-4 years ago? To assume DDP has not, grown as a fighter leaps and bounds since then would be a bit delusional to think of. So that's their notable wins. Dricus obviously has the better wins, but Hamzat, I would say, has been the more dominant fighter across their careers. Let's look at the next thing where I want to talk about Khamzat Chimaev striking and cardio. I think they're being a little bit underrated against DDP. The whole narrative going into this fight is that Khamzat Chimaev's cardio is questionable, right? He quote-unquote gassed out against Gilbert Burns, which I don't largely agree with, and he slowed down against Kamaru Usman. Now, outside of that, we haven't really had to see his cardio because this guy mauls everybody in the first round. So he hasn't really had to show 3-round or 5-round cardio, whatever you want to call it. I don't think Hamzat's ever had to fight 5 rounds. I think he's only been scheduled for 3 rounds across his UFC career. So if I'm not mistaken, this fight against Dricus is his first 5-round fight. But people are concerned about his cardio because he has the history of sicknesses, and people are afraid that's taking a toll on his lungs, right? And he can't go 5 rounds. And Hamzat, in the lead up to this fight, is saying, hold up, you guys are underestimating my cardio, and I'm going to prove you guys wrong and show you guys that I can go all 5 rounds. And my cardio is not an issue. I do think the whole narrative around Hamzat's cardio being like bad is a bit of an overrated topic, an overrated narrative. I think his cardio, it isn't great, but it isn't bad. It's kind of just decent. I think Hamzat has decent cardio Of course, when you go out there in the first round and you're looking to take someone's head off, take him to the ground immediately, exert all your energy on getting a submission or dominate in the grappling, of course, you're going to see a drop off in cardio unless you're Merab Dvalishvili, who doesn't go all out like Hamzat does. So, yes, Hamzat's cardio, it isn't the level of like the top of the top when it comes to cardio, but I think he has decent slash solid cardio. Now, his striking, I think, is also being a bit underrated. If you look at Hamzat on the pads leading up to the DDP fight, he arguably looks more clean in the striking. And this guy also has underrated power. I think his power is extremely underrated as well. Khamzat Chimaev has one-punch KO'd Ikram Alaskarov with an uppercut. And he's also one-punch KO'd Gerald Mearshart a few years ago in 17 seconds. And if Dricus thinks that he can take a bomb from Hamzat, he better be careful, man, because Hamzat has dynamite in his hands, and he also has dynamite in his grappling. So, yeah, that's two things I wanted to talk about from Hamzat. His cardio as well as his striking, I think, are being a little bit underrated just because of how insanely dominant his grappling and just overpowering his grappling and wrestling is. People tend to forget that this guy actually has power in his hands, and he actually has solid technique on the feet. We just don't see it very often because he chooses to shoot a takedown typically within 15 seconds of the fight and get the fight to the ground and typically gets the finish. Let's get on to Dricus Du Plessis. He hasn't really faced an elite offensive grappler wrestler in the UFC, man. Let's just call it what it is. Khamzat Chimaev is by far, and I mean by far, the best grappler slash wrestler that Dricus Du Plessis faced in his entire career. Let's call it what it is, man. Dricus has largely been facing strikers. Sean Strickland 2 times. Israel Adesanya. Robert Whittaker. Robert Whittaker's a striker. He has good defensive wrestling and good defensive grappling, but ultimately Robert Whittaker is a karate striker. That's just what it is. Who's the only grappler that Dricus has faced in his entire UFC career? It's been Derek Brunson, and Derek Brunson largely was able to get Dricus's back. Now, do I think Dricus has improved since then? Absolutely, I have. I do not think that Dricus Du Plessis is the same fighter that fought Derek Brunson. Obviously, this entire training camp for Dricus is going to be drilling how to get up from a takedown, drilling submission defense, which I think that's the most important thing for Dricus. I think ultimately Dricus Du Plessis has to accept his fate. He will be taken down in this fight, 100%. It's not a question of if. It's a question of can he defend the submissions. Kamaru Usman was able to defend the submissions of Khamzat Chimaev for an entire round. Dricus Du Plessis is also a massive middleweight. He's much bigger than Kamaru Usman. So will that size advantage or that size help in defending submissions against Hamzat? Because he's going to be able to get up maybe a lot easier than a Kamaru Usman can because he's a lot bigger. He's also bigger than Robert Whittaker. Robert Whittaker isn't the biggest middleweight. Dricus walks around at like 225 pounds. So ultimately, will the size of Dricus Du Plessis be able to help him in the grappling? Maybe a little. I think it'll help him getting up back to his feet. He's going to be a very hard guy to hold down. But the real question is his submission defense. We haven't really had to see it in his career. He's been gotten his bat taken by who? Derek Brunson, if I'm not mistaken. That's really the only time we've seen Dricus have to show off like some submission defense. And he was able to fend off Derek Brunson, ultimately getting the finish in the end. But who's really tried a submission on Dricus Du Plessis? We really don't know. We know that Dricus has good offensive grappling himself. He has 11 submissions on his record for a reason. But who has really tried to submit Dricus Du Plessis in the grappling? Nobody. Now, obviously, his entire training camp is going to be based around this. But ultimately, man, I don't know. This is a hard matchup to predict. I'm sure you guys, from what I'm saying in the video, are thinking that I'm leaning Khamzat Chimaev. And ultimately, I am. Let's get on to the last slider, and I want to talk about this. There's two possible outcomes in this fight. Hamzat first round mauling / submission, and or Dricus Du Plessis survives the first round, takes over as the fight goes on, ultimately getting a late finish. Now, there is a world where Khamzat Chimaev goes out there and just lands a brutal one-punch KO on Dricus, obviously. Or there's a world where Dricus cracks Hamzat and knocks him out as well. Obviously, that's a chance. But I think the most likely outcomes of this fight is that Hamzat goes out there, takes Dricus Du Plessis down, just like he did to Whittaker, shoots an extremely low takedown, gets him to the ground, takes his back, and either gets a ground and pound TKO, or he gets a submission win, or Dricus survives, gets the fight back to the feet, and Khamzat Chimaev's like, holy shit, this guy can actually get back to his feet, and he's not Kamaru Usman. He's actually a massive middleweight that doesn't gas out and also has dynamite in his hands as well. I don't know, man. If you guys remember, if you've been following the channel for a while, I ultimately did pick Khamzat Chimaev to submit Robert Whittaker in the first round, and I was right in that fight. I was right. I predicted it to a T. I said Hamzat would get the takedown. He would submit Whittaker. Whittaker's never faced any submission threat in the UFC pretty much in his entire UFC career. Nobody's really attempted submissions against Robert Whittaker. And DDP's kind of in the same situation as Whitaker facing Hamzat. He's never faced anybody in the middleweight division that really has a submission threat. Largely, the middleweight division until recent hasn't really had grappling / submission threats. Now you have guys like Cal Barajo who have solid grappling, Roman Dolidze who just got schooled, but he has solid grappling, and Anthony Hernandez who has amazing grappling. But largely, the middleweight division over the years has been strikers, and that's who DDP has been fighting. He has not fought the level of Khamzat Chimaev in the terms of the grappling. And ultimately, my prediction for this fight, I'm going to go with Khamzat Chimaev by a first or second round submission. I just cannot go against the once in a lifetime talent and just skill of grappling that we've seen in Khamzat Chimaev. We've never seen this. As a lot of people say, he is the Mike Tyson of grappling in the first round. And I don't even think that Dricus Du Plessis can survive that storm. I know Kamaru Usman was able to survive that storm, but this is a different beast, man. This is Khamzat Chimaev with the best coaches in the world. This is Khamzat Chimaev with cardio coaches. You see it in his training, man, in his open workouts and his wrestling training. You see this guy's taking this serious. He's hit a new level. He's matured a lot more. And I love DDP. I would not be mad if he won. I would not be surprised if he won. If there's anyone that can weather the storm, it is Dricus Du Plessis. But ultimately, I do think that Khamzat Chimaev is going to submit Dricus Du Plessis at the midway point of the first round or at the beginning of the second round. And we're just going to look at the UFC and say, who can beat this guy? Who can truly beat Khamzat Chimaev? If he goes out there and mauls Dricus Du Plessis, the middleweight division is lost for hope. Now, who do I want to win? I want Dricus Du Plessis to win ultimately because I like an active champion. I think DDP is a more active fighter, and I think he's willing to take on all challenges. So is Hamzat, but Hamzat in recent times has not shown great activity, so I think it's better for the division if DDP wins. Otherwise, you're going to have Hamzat fighting once every 10 or 11 months. You're going to have him talking about double and triple champ fights, and I just want to be past that era of the UFC, man. I just want to. The whole double champ thing is burnt out on everybody. But I'm yapping away. Ultimately, Khamzat Chimaev by first round submission is my pick. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Is DDP going to weather the storm? Is he going to be able to win? And if he does, who beats DDP? I don't think anybody does.